So, welcome back to the Money and Soul podcast. I am here with my good friend Michael Feiner, and we're excited today to talk to you about what we believe is a completely novel, uncharted territory, bringing you the Enneagram, economy, and the war in Ukraine, and merging all those three things together so we can get some clarity, some sanity, and move forward in our lives and our, financial lives, our personal lives, and most of all out in the global place to get some peace and bring some tranquility back to this world. What's going on, brother?
Not too much. Thanks for joining me on this podcast, and thanks for introducing me to the Enneagram a while ago and having this discussion, which I think, like you said, is not only very novel, but insightful for a lot of the problems that we have.
Yeah, maybe we'll start there, Mike. I know that both your position in as a financial advisor and also your experience in the military. You've had access to a lot of personality profiling assessments out there, and you had shared that this one kind of struck you a little bit differently. Maybe you just share with our audience why this one speaks to you.
Well, it's always interesting, especially from the military lens that I've had, that when you're looking at military strategy or operational art or tactics, that you want to have a sense of who the opponent is and their way of thinking and whatnot. And there are different ways to do that. You've introduced me to the Enneagram, which I found quite compelling. And obviously, we had a conversation as to how the three main players, Putin, Zelenskyy, and Biden, what enneagrams and characteristics they have, because all the pundits and sort of all of the ideas that we have on how this may turn out partially is a function of the leadership.
Yep.
And I'm looking at the operations and the war a little bit differently through this Enneagram than I normally would through a military lens, and that's
Mm.
very helpful.
Well, that's great to hear. Yeah, just a maybe real brief overview of the Enneagram. Ennea means nine, and gram is a picture. So, this is an ancient diagram, if you will, growing out of probably geometry, probably mathematics, very much built into this equation is that triangle, the equilateral triangle, which is really the basis of it. And I won't go down too far down the rabbit hole, but it speaks to mental, intellectual types, and it speaks to emotional types. It's got both qualities. And so I really think that this is and it's more than just a personality. These are nine basic patterns all throughout nature, nine basic patterns in personalities, nine basic energies. And so I think it gives us both an intellectual approach, an emotional approach. It's actionable. I mean, like you're talking about, Mike, that we can start to see patterns. We can start to make better informed choices, take action. It is not a crystal ball, right? Part of the work I'm doing is called the Defiant Spirit, and I want to make sure our listeners and viewers know this. The work that I'm doing is based on the work of Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, who was he resisted personality typing systems because when you start reducing people to a number and to a label, that's some dangerous stuff. I think in some ways that's what Putin has done to the Ukrainians, reduce them to a country to be acquired. And so he's forgotten that they are brothers, literally brothers and sisters and cousins. And I wouldn't want to use the Enneagram or misuse it to type anybody, to put them in a box. But I think if we can start understanding the behaviors, the patterns, the basics of how somebody is wired, we can start to address it a little more thoughtfully, a little more proactively. So that's kind of where we're coming from and where we're going. And then maybe we just jump in and look at some of the work we've been doing behind the scenes around three different leadership styles and three different Enneagram types. What do you think?
I think that would be superb because it's so poignant right now to see if this is going to provide insight into what happens in the next few weeks, months, years.
Yeah, I mean, I know it's true in my life that the more I know about the Enneagram, and I'm an eight, or at least I react like an eight. Michael, for the record, is a three, or at least he reacts like a three. And I say that because, when we're in our lowest default, kind of just survive, fight, freeze, flight, we go to our Enneagram number, but we have free will. We can choose to stop reacting, to not live in fear. And we'll see some great leaders who have really defied some of their negative sides of their number, but each side also has a positive. Now, this is a big slide, and we're not going to do it all today. I just wanted our viewers to see that nine types, there are clumps of leaders. Originally, I did this, and Mike and I were just talking before this. I did it just as presidents of the United States. And then I realized there's some gaps. So I started filling in the gaps. For instance, there are no, let me say one more thing. There's no definitive, these presidents are this type. Some of the presidents have actually taken, I think, the Enneagram assessment. Most probably have not. There is conjecture about a few of them is, they could go this way, they could go that way. So this is not hard data, but I think it's backed by at least empirical, experiential data. So I couldn't find any twos. Enneagram 2 is the helper, it's the nurturer. But what I started to find were these are just a handful of the first ladies, many of which are twos. And it kind of makes sense. Oftentimes, a two, and you don't have to be a woman to be a two, is more of a background player, somebody who likes the background and playing a supporting role. So, obviously, First Lady would be a supporting role. Lots of threes. Joe Biden is a three, probably. And so we'll be looking at threes today. Lots of ones, that we're not really going to look at ones today, but it's a couple of first ladies and Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama and some great world leaders around ones. And couple or three prominent presidents up at nine: Reagan, Obama, and Clinton. So there were a few other nines. Eights, well represented. These are the more intense types. Nines are a little more diplomatic. Ones are a little more methodical, detail oriented, and kind of value based. Eights are more intense, can be very angry and unrefined, can be very evolved, like Martin Luther King. But even when you think about Martin Luther King, there was a fiery energy there, and there needed to be to cut through injustice. So, and you look at like Churchill, right? Thank God for Churchill, right? Going up against the Nazis. So, it's a more of a fiery type. But today we're really going to focus on this one here, the seven, the enthusiast, a visionary, an optimist, and Zelenskyy. President Zelenskyy is in that category. JFK, FDR. So these are visionaries. Six is Putin, and that's why we're going to be looking at him. And you can see a lot of presidents have been sixes, both Bushes, probably Nixon, Bobby Kennedy wasn't a president, but certainly a politician, Newt Gingrich, J. Edgar Hoover. You can see how, there's some similarities already we're seeing. Malcolm X. And then lastly, again, we're going to look at the threes, Biden and cast characters over there. So I'm going to pause before we kind of start to boil it down. Michael, any kind of big picture thoughts or questions or commentaries here?
Well, I was struck by this analysis because of the clumps of different personalities. Like you said, this is so helpful when it comes to how one innately reacts. And as we talked after this was done, I'm also interested in the idea of the people. You said the United States as a country is sort of a three. Russia and the Ukraine are a little bit different if you were to look at what Enneagram the whole culture would be, if that's such a thing. And that's only important to me in the sense of, did Putin, when he attacked, think about this in the sense of what are the people like when you attack them versus the army? So that's a different conversation. But I know we as a three look at, as a country, the United States are looking at things differently, where Ukraine is not a three. So they react differently than we do. So putting our thought process onto the Ukraine is different. And likewise for Putin. He's dealing with his population, which is not a three. It's, I think, did we say they were maybe
they're six. So
a
definitely
6
6
themselves.
Russia.
Yeah, so they're a 6, we're a 3, and maybe that's a good way to start to say, well, our
Yeah.
leader is a 3, our people are a 3. Russia is a 6, their people are a 6.
Yep.
Zelensky is a 7. The Ukrainians, are they a 6 or are they?
I
Uh,
just don't know enough about the culture of
yeah,
Ukraine. We know that they broke off of, or see themselves as separate from Russia, and I do think there is an energetic kind of a shift, and it would make sense because again, this is all built on mathematics. So when two numbers are next to each other, there's a reason why. We can go into the deeper levels, but 6 and 7 converge and then diverge. And so you can feel this Ukrainian pull away from their Russian roots. It would make sense that they would either be a 7 or a 5. And I know they're
okay.
not a 5. Just maybe I'll just share a little bit about the 3, 6, and 9. We'll come back to all of these, I'm sure, at different times now that we have this amazing tool that you and I really have kind of discovered together. Let's focus on today 7, 6, and 3. High level. 3. A lot of people do say America is a 3 country. We're a performance achievement. You look at things like Hollywood, right? It's an actor, it's a performer. There's a visual quality to it. There's a how do we look? We care about the appearance of lots of different things. So 3 really it's a CEO kind of a culture. Lots of CEOs are 3s. Um, back in the day, like in high school, it's prom king, it's prom queen. These are the winners. And there's some shadow sides. We can figure out some of those shadow sides. When you're achievement oriented, sometimes you're willing to step on people in your way to get there. Image can become everything. And the Enneagram is really amazing because there's low levels or unhealthy version of our type, and then there's a healthy version. And so really figuring out where we are as a country as far as our health, where we are as leaders with our health. But that's kind of a flavor of a 3. And he thinks, and Mike, 3 is probably better than I do since that is your default. Anything you want to add to the 3 that you've already discovered?
No, I think it is important to have the ideas regarding the traits and the natural reaction, because I know once, of course, you helped me understand that I was a 3, and it made sense not only for what I've gravitated to in my life, but my natural instincts
Mm-hmm.
do seem to relate to that on the good side and the bad side, as you've pointed out, and I think you're absolutely right. And I react differently as a result, being a 3. When I'm looking at Putin, I have certain ideas like action. What should we do to solve it? What can we
Mm-hmm.
do in the short run? How can I do this quickly? And I'm not sure that now seeing that Mr. Putin, for example, is a 6, whether that approach makes any sense whatsoever, because he's not looking at it necessarily from the quick reaction of the way others are looking at him. I don't
Right.
think he cares as much, if I've understood this, and what your is Viktor Frankl is your teacher, you're my teacher. Maybe Putin, he doesn't care as much about what people think as Biden does or I do. And as a result, that makes a big difference, because he can do things for long periods of time without that. If you were the shareholders, he doesn't care what the shareholders think in his corporation, maybe.
Yes, that's great analysis. 3s are about expediency. And they can get themselves into trouble. Like you look at like an Enron or a Bernie Madoff, right? They were 3s. Like they were, they climbed, they produced, but in the process, somewhere along the way, they lost themselves to the outcome, to the goal. 3s can get themselves into trouble. Probably lots of white collar crime are 3s. And if you think about that, they chose expediency over integrity. And so that's the shadow side of a 3, where if you're looking, and this is the America challenge, right? We're going so fast, so quick that we forget to slow down, and the world doesn't move at this pace. So I think you're right. I think we looked at what happened right away, Ukraine, and what Putin did from a 3 lens of this is going to be quick. We'll figure it out quick. It'll be over quick. And I think we're thinking like Americans, like 3s. And I don't think that that's how Putin is thinking as a 6. You're right.
I think that's very important to understand that he's looking at some longer term goal, and he has, you know, a focus, and he's pushing out the noise. I'm not sure he worries about what we have to say, the sanctions, as much what his people have to say, because he has a different lens and he's hearing things differently. Not that they don't impact him. I don't mean to minimize all these things, but it is really a different view. And if that view is different, we better adjust to, how he's thinking. Even in the military sense, you want to be empathetic to understand how the opponent thinks, so that you can respond appropriately. And I think a response, and we discussed this before when we talked about President Zelensky. President Putin suggested that we give him a ride, and he said, I don't need a ride, I need ammo. So
Biden, Biden said
Biden,
that to
excuse me,
Zelensky.
Biden said that to President Zelensky, which is saying, hey, expedience, and President Zelensky's not looking for expedience. And
Right.
President Putin, I'm not sure who's Prime Minister Zelensky. I have to recall the forms of
I think it's
who's
President Zelensky. Yeah, I can't remember if it's
And
Putin as prime minister.
He's
Whatever.
not prime minister. He's Emperor Putin at this point. But from that perspective of how everyone, obviously Zelensky is probably viewing things from a long term, since this is his country, but we're reacting purely out of expediency. We'd do anything to have this thing. We're looking at it in days and weeks rather than years and decades, and I think that's problematic.
Well, the other thing along those lines is, if you think about it, 3 cares a tremendous amount about image. They're the most image conscious, right? So vanity can be a real challenge for a 3. And it isn't just looking in the mirror vanity. It's, I can't, and I have a lot of 3 in me. And as an American, you have to. As a Westerner, I think you have to, because we're all thinking, how can Putin be so reviled? I mean, since Hitler, I would argue that the world hasn't had more consensus about the evil nature of a single person and what they represent. Everybody agrees this is wrong. And so we sit here going, how come he doesn't change his tune? Because he has 0-3 in him. He doesn't care what it looks like. Right? We can't just assume he has our values.
I think that's such a fundamental premise to viewing how this is going to evolve. The United States, every pundit almost gets it wrong. Like, will he attack? No, because a 3 wouldn't, or we wouldn't. But he's not looking at it from our perspective, and trying to understand what perspective he's looking at it from. Like you said, maybe being a 6 where he's fearful and looking to the past, he's looking to a different model, a different paradigm, where we're looking to the future. And this tells us, as we've said before, that this is going to last for a long time. It's not going to be expedient, and we have to get our mental attitude and intellectualize the fact that this is going to persist for a long, long time.
So a couple other components along those lines. 3s look to the future, as you referenced, very future oriented. I would say 3s, 7s, and 8s are the most future oriented. So you're going to start seeing some commonalities between us and Zelensky. 3s are emotional, even though, and this, sometimes it doesn't feel like they're emotional, because emotions can get in the way of expediency. And so the work of a 3 is really to get in touch with their emotions and not offer somebody a ride when they need ammo, right? That was a low functioning 3 response. Here's a ride. And we weren't empathizing with how much this man has sacrificed. He doesn't want out. That's not who he is. So we weren't really empathizing, using any feeling in that statement. But they're future oriented, they're emotional, optimistic. Now you move over to the 6, right? Straight across from them, that line connects a 6 and a 3, because there's a lot of commonalities, but there are also some polar opposites. So 6 is a thinking, and it's the thinking that can go either way. It can ascend, and they can become more like 5s, which is more like pure thought, pure reason. But then they can also go the opposite, which is paranoia and doubt and fear and isolationism. So it depends if you're healthy or if you're an unhealthy six. And an unhealthy six can be the most dangerous, like a Hoover, right? I mean, you can feel like the paranoia, very similar kind of a vibe. And so if a six starts surrounding themselves with people who, and six is past oriented, so they hold on to the past and they start having selective memory, remembering what they want about the past. And then you surround yourself with like-minded people or yes men, you can see how this thing really starts to downward spiral.
I think you've hit it in the sweet spot with this paranoia, especially when I saw the picture of J. Edgar Hoover. That was very poignant for me to realize that he was obviously someone who was always worried about things. That's, I suppose, part of his job. But that personality to be over worried, and you wonder what's going through Putin's mind. No one will know, but there's clearly a fear there, right? I mean, he even said it. He feared NATO. He has said that he fears certain things. He doesn't want Ukraine to go into NATO's hands because the other ex-Soviet republics, Baltic states, Poland, Romania, etc., have already done that. There's a definite fear, paranoia, aside from his past view of imperialistic
Yes.
determination. So, with that in mind, it's very telling as to, I don't think President Biden is going to be able to solve this with a personality like that. So how does it get solved with who can solve a six's problems? Which personality type has to help with that?
Well, I mean, all personality types have abilities to deal with all others if you're healthy and if you are aware of who you're dealing with. I come back to Putin for a second. You look at Malcolm X as an example. Malcolm X and Martin Luther King represented two fundamental different ways to approach the same issue, right? Civil rights. And you can feel that Malcolm X's was, burned hotter and hotter, pushing people away from that fire. And that's sometimes what happens with the six is they can become the most fiery of leaders or personalities. And they can go two ways. The six is the most extreme. You have two types of sixes. You have one that's called the phobic six and one the counterphobic. All sixes deal in fear because fear is mental, right? That's where fear comes from. I mean, we start cranking out anxiety. And so to deal with their fear, you can either have a phobic six, which lots of comedians are phobic sixes. If you think of Larry David as the quintessential phobic six, that anxiety is just palpable and it becomes almost comical. It's weak, right? It feels just so weak. But then you have the counterphobic. They're the most dangerous. They're the ones who look like eights. They're fiery, but it's coming from fear. So if you look at, remember Evil Knievel back in the day?
Oh
Jumping
yeah,
over like it's
with
big, like shark
Snake
fins.
Canyon, that rocket ship, when he ended up at the bottom of the canyon, probably not his best day.
Yeah, that guy like broke more bones than anybody. And where that's
Yeah.
coming from is a place of fear, but it's charging head into the fire. Mel Gibson's a well-known counterphobic six. He looks like a tough guy. Steve McQueen, Tommy Lee Jones, these are famous, obviously. Chuck Norris. So, but it's coming from a place of actually being afraid and so running into the fire. And I think Putin is most definitely a counterphobic six. So he looks like the tough guy, the former judo guy, the KGB, right? You can feel like the KGB is fear, but it's an angry fear. So they're going to come
Mhm.
at you. And you can just still feel so much of that in Putin.
For sure. I mean, especially this is such a great chart because it helps analogize it to other personalities to get a sense of how they might deal with an issue or problem.
Mm.
And that's where I keep coming back to. And every time I look at this, it makes me conclude that this is not something that will end easily or in the short term. And we are going to be dealing with this for quite a long time, which is important to understand for a variety of reasons, whether it's your own emotional well-being or whether it is, as I look at the lens of economically and from an investment perspective, to say, guess what? We now have a new normal, if you will, that this war is going to be going on, or some version of it, insurgency, counterinsurgency, for probably a very long time, because Putin probably will not stop until all ends are met, and those ends are complicated and probably complete subjugation of the country. So that's now a new fact that must be analyzed in the greater economic reality.
Absolutely. You know, this word loyalist is called the six, but it can go either way. You can be loyal to the wrong people, to the wrong thing. So Russia is a loyalist country, you know, not because necessarily they wanted to be, but you have, you know, generation upon generation of no choice. You know, you've outsourced your power to a dictator. And so you can see it in Putin. There's a loyalty to his decision, his cause, a paranoid cause, a fearful cause, but his cause, he's not going to let go. And so you're absolutely right. We've got to change our time frame or our strategy or both. But he's, you know, he's got, he's the pit bull with his bone in his mouth, and he's not letting that go.
So well, there we go.
Yeah.
He's not
Now
letting it go.
Let's look at 7 real quick, and then we'll, you know, dig down a little bit deeper. But just to give our viewers and listeners a sense of 7, 7's called the enthusiasts. They're the visionaries. They're extremely future focused, because to be a visionary, you have to be. Oftentimes, however, and they're also funny. They're kind of larger than life personalities. Lots of actors like Jim Carrey, you know, that energy. You know, again, JFK, FDR, painting lofty visions. So that's at a higher level. At a lower level, because each one of these types is a low functioning or unhealthy, they're kind of running from something. They don't like to deal in the present because they don't like suffering. They don't like to deal with the reality of life, the messiness of life. They don't want to acknowledge the reality. So sometimes they seem almost disconnected from reality, like they're living in a false reality or a optimistic, you know, they're optimists. And so now you look at this 7 and 6, you got the ultimate optimist in the 7 and the ultimate pessimist in the 6. I would say Zelenskyy is now a really healthy 7, because 7s are oftentimes in it for themselves. 7s will often neglect the people around them if they're not healthy, and run off to the horizon. And so getting them to execute on a plan, to stay put, to take responsibility. Well, Zelensky's all those things. So he's a very healthy 7, just like JFK was, and these other people in this picture. Dalai Lama. I mean, you know, what an amazing spirit. So you have this very healthy 7 now, future-oriented, optimistic, visionary, selfless, going up against almost the exact opposite.
And there we go. We have 2 opponents. The question is who wins a test of the wills, and obviously it's not equal from a military firepower perspective, but like you said, Zelenskyy has world opinion, world economy, other forms of national power on his side, and Putin has firepower and certain advantages on his side. So does the enthusiast and Zelenskyy able to really energize his population long enough to overcome the initial advantages that Putin has? Or is this going to be, they're so opposite that they can't come to an agreement ever? That's my concern, is is negotiation possible when you have these types of opposites? We know with the three maybe that they want to just get something done, so they'll make a deal, right? Probably like Monty Hall, let's make a deal for the three. But can the six and seven ever come to a deal when the vision is so far from what the six is trying to impose? That's my concern at this point, that this thing cannot get resolved because they're so far apart.
Yeah, and it's not just because of their 6 and 7. It's because Zelensky appears to be so healthy, right? Really, an ideal version of a 7, for the reasons I described, and I just gave our viewers here a summary. And I'll make these slides available so people can download them. And then Putin is such an unhealthy 6. And that's the real challenge, is the divide between a healthy functioning anything and an unhealthy functioning anything. I don't think the world has too much faith that negotiation is going to bring these two to a table. And I certainly don't. Now, with that said, I think, and you're the military guy, you tell us, but we can adapt our strategies around some of these factors a little differently than we would have, or even we considered 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago at this point. That's gone.
It is gone. But if you know that if Putin is working from a paranoia fear level, which he expressed, right, as his at least pretext for attacking Ukraine, that he was afraid of NATO.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe assuming that's the case for a minute, that is a big fear, or not just a pretext to, conquer the Ukrainians as a power move or whatnot. How do you remove some of his fear at this point? He's proven his point in that he attacked and he's providing devastation. And when most people didn't think from a logical perspective it made sense. Now, how do you get him back to where he is? And what are the implications of this whole situation now? If it plays out to the end and he takes the country in a tactical sense, right, takes Kiev, destroys their military, of course, he has a broken country and it's not going to end well. Historically, it just never ends well when you're attacking something that large. You can't occupy Ukraine, it's too large. We know that, but that's 5 or 10 years down the road. And in the shorter term, how do the pieces change? I think it changes Europe fundamentally, more importantly than anything, especially Central and Eastern Europe in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, obviously so incredibly complicated. What gives me hope is that if you look at history, paranoid 6s, Hitler was probably another one. They go down this hole and it's almost like a cancer, right? It devours the host organism. I mean, cancer is a stupid disease because it kills itself ultimately, because it kills the host. And I would say that, Putin and Hitler have this cancerous quality where they destroy their base. They destroy their country. Look at what Putin's doing, like he is literally destroying the host called Russia, this place. And so my hope is that these always dictators and dictatorial countries, regimes always devour themselves. And I think that that's probably what happens. And then as people turn on him, right, the antibodies kick in.
That's my concern. Everyone that, thinks that maybe he devours himself, which would make sense, right, logically. But there are plenty of dictators in the world. You can look at North Korea, you can look at Libya at the time, you can look at Iraq with Saddam. I'm not sure that a dictator who is sophisticated enough and can subjugate his people can either last forever, a long time, or it doesn't matter. I'm wondering if that could be a possibility of maybe if it were us. I mean, we have a different mentality as to revolution and whatnot. I'm not sure that he's as at risk internally, regardless of the economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the question, and that's part of our strategy, right? If you cut off all resources going to him, eventually you're going to dry it up. People, the oligarchs are going to turn, and
Yeah, it would work here. in the United
Yeah.
States, I mean, if you cut off the internet for 2 days, we'd probably surrender, right? Because it's like a snowstorm in Boston, no electricity, milk and bread, and is outrage. I'm not sure that that's the same paradigm in Russia, which is my concern that that just isn't the case. They'll endure a lot more for a lot of reasons
Yeah.
than a Western society will, and as a result, we're in a thicket that we've got to grapple with in a much different way, or to adjust. And like I said, there are so many different variables of how it works out. The ones that I know we're focused on are in your case, helping people be mentally healthy, and in my case, of course, that plus trying to understand how this is going to impact the investments, the economy, which which that's the instrument that we're using. They're trying to use an economic instrument to deal with this. For all practical
It-
purposes, it's not really military; it's mostly economic. And how does that work? Does it work? It hasn't worked against Iran necessarily. It hasn't worked against North Korea. It has some impact, but I'm not sure that it's really going to have as much of an impact. And as a result, I've come to the conclusion that we are going to live with this in the short and medium term, and we need to make adjustments financially.
yeah. And even if it doesn't devour itself, or Putin doesn't devour himself, I think for me, both from an economic and from a psychological perspective, is understanding that, he's reductionistic. His world gets smaller. Their economy is getting smaller. Their reach is getting smaller. They're cutting themselves off from the world. So just kind of taking that into consideration, and taking into consideration that this is a fundamental character flaw. Like, we can't go back to them and buy oil, in my opinion, right? So we have to shift our focus away from this broken system, as opposed to how do we fix the system. I don't think we're going to fix the system. I think we need a new system, whether that's drilling for oil here or finding better partners. That's a different conversation. But to me, at least it's stark, and it's not, well, maybe we'll get back to where we were. I don't think we'll ever get back to where we were with doing business with Russia.
No, I think especially the European theater is fundamentally changed and how they're going to approach its partners. We're fortunate in the sense we're somewhat independent with energy now. We've learned some lessons over time to get self-sufficient, although not completely, obviously. But it changed the dynamics, almost like COVID did when we had supply chain issues and couldn't get certain goods in different areas and got shut off with whether it was antibiotics or supply issues. That we as a country might get more defensive and more individualistic in the sense of not wanting to play ball with the rest of the world so that we can protect our economic and other statuses.
Absolutely. I guess ending up with Zelensky, because I think he's been well, he definitely has been an underdog, no doubt about it. But I think he was underestimated. If Putin had the Enneagram, he might not have gone in with the same strategy, because if you have the healthy seven, and he's a visionary, she's a visionary, she can paint a picture of what's possible, and she's all in. I mean, like Steve Jobs was probably a seven with an eight wing, or an eight with a seven wing. Like, he changed the way we live because he didn't take no for an answer. He had a vision, and his vision is now in our hand, everybody's hand. He's changed the way we think, for better or worse. But they have that kind of a reach. Again, the Dalai Lama, JFK, Galileo, Mozart, these were all sevens. And I think that for me, the big takeaway has been never underestimate a seven. And Zelensky, as long as he stays alive, I think at this point, even if they kill him, he's going to be martyred. But he has really shifted the way at least I look at the world, and given me such hope and inspiration.
Yeah, it certainly he has presented courage in the best of humanity and wanting to protect his home and the people and everything surrounding that. It is interesting that he was so underestimated. I admit I didn't know much about him other than his actor past, and And I have some Ukrainian friends and who are still in the Ukraine, and they're courageous for staying there, won't leave, fighting. They definitely have a spirit. It is interesting that they were underestimated in their reaction. Uh, the last reaction we had was in Afghanistan when the Taliban attacked and everyone just rolled over. So maybe
And
Putin
their
thought
president just left, right? What was his name?
he is the one who took a quick ride, and he left, and he's still probably somewhere in, I don't know if it's Pakistan or where he is, but his government is exiled, right? And that was quick, and they thought, and the United States was part of that, and we didn't attack. Putin was right. NATO hasn't done anything from a tactical and military perspective. That part of the assessment has been correct. The way the world has changed mentally, uh, the social media piece and everything else, and the magnification of Zelensky's vision is inspiring, and it's interesting to see how that is going to impact the rest of us. Like you said, whether he lives or whether he dies, and how this changes the world over time.
Yeah, this isn't necessarily helpful to the investor, but I do think it is helpful to understanding, at a macro level, what's happening out there and a new lens to look at it. And I'll end with this: that this six unhealthy six is a contraction. It's a Viktor Frankl would say it's a reduction. It's getting smaller, and the seven, this healthy seven, is a vision. It's expansive, right? And at least in mystical terms, the expansive always wins. Reduction will reduce itself to nothing. You and I can kind of maybe agree to disagree on whether or not that means that Putin and Russia will fizzle out. But throughout history, if you look at Jewish history, right? Every single empire that has come and tried to crush the Jewish people is almost gone. Like they're all gone. And this little nothing of a religion is still here, pretty much going strong, because it's much more of a seven hope. The national anthem, for example, of Israel is Hatikva, the hope, right? So this vision, this hope, and you really see it embodied in Zelenskyy. I would say it's not coincidental to me that he's a grandson of a Holocaust survivor, and he's the only one of that family's line. His grandfather's 5 of his brothers were murdered in the Holocaust, and Zelensky's an only child. And so there is this hope, this optimism that against all odds, this expansive visionary view of the world somehow, some way always wins. So, I'll end on my end with that message of hope. How do you want to end, Mike?
You're tough to come. I mean, with a message like that, I mean, it's really tough to want to provide any ending, except for the fact that taking all this into consideration, we look through the noise to understand how, whether it's individuals, the world, or the economy, is going to digest all of this to the future. In a certain sense, in the short run, this is really difficult for the world, right, to have a war. On the other hand, to your point, the hope that it brings, the thing that inspires me the most is the hope that the world actually, and you began with this, came together in unity, which is, I can't remember the last time it's happened to this degree, to condemn this. And this may be a seminal moment that, although we have pain in the short run, that the world is coming together in a positive change way for a new hope and a new vision, which will lead to better outcomes in the future, which gives me hope. And I guess you have to be hopeful when you do what I do for a living, for investments, thinking that the world will be better and that profits will be better, and the companies will figure out ways to thrive, and individuals will thrive, and we will get through this as we have gotten through every other problem in the world.
Well, and as my financial advisor, as well as my friend and my podcast partner, you have continuously reminded me of that in my investment strategy and in the markets. You've reminded me that, this is all cyclical. right? There's these cycles, and it's not a straight line up or down. It's a spiral, and it's continuously. I mean, just look at the markets, right? Continuously an upward trajectory, and that gives me hope. And I feel like that's the same with humanity and the human spirit. Is yeah, there are these down cycles, but if you just map it out from a historical perspective, the data only points really in one direction. Isn't that a fair assessment?
I, I, I think that's a brilliant assessment that the trajectory is up, but it's has its ups and downs.
That's right. So, our viewers and listeners should take hope that yes, this is a rough time and a rough cycle, but as the old saying goes, this too shall pass, and we are growing. We are still looking forward. We got that three American mentality that we will somehow in some way figure it out, and we always have. I believe we always will. So, I hope that's the takeaway from our viewers. You have a new set of resources, tools, roadmaps through this Enneagram. If you'd like to learn more about the Enneagram, I would be delighted to hear from you. You can get a hold of me at defiantspirit.org. You can download these slides I'll make available in our show notes. And you can get a hold of Michael Feiner, who's been amazing in my life, guiding me both economically and strategically and just as a friend. Get a hold of him at feiner.com. Is that right, Mike?
That is. Thank you so much for imparting your knowledge because I mean you're just amazing, an amazing coach, an amazing friend. I'd encourage people who are interested in this topic to talk to Rabbi B, uh, just because he's so insightful as to general knowledge and general perspective of so many different areas. Uh, and then you've made a huge impact on the way I'm looking at things, giving me more tools to solve issues and to understand the world better. So, thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. And yes, stay tuned to our viewers for a program that Michael and I are going to be putting together, how to utilize the Enneagram as another tool in your investing in the way you approach money, your finances, because I think it can be an invaluable resource to know yourself, to know your patterns, to know the way you react, and also the way you respond. So stay tuned for that. Work in progress. Until then, we will keep bringing you the Money and Soul podcast. Take care.